Hey, Peggy, any luck?
Okay, I just sent Jeff Jennings an invitation, so he should be receiving that momentarily.
So we're live, 2 minutes to the meeting. We just need Paul, Jeff Jennings, and Mark Rylander. Peggy, you all set?
Yes.
Good.
What we should really do is meet under a tree.
That wouldn't be public. I mean, it would be public, but not the right kind of public.
It would be appropriate.
It would. Give one more minute. We have a quorum, but since this is our first time with a technical meeting, we'll give them one more minute. Paul is usually arrives fashionably late, so. And Mark as well, so we'll give Jeff a minute. All right, I am now going to call to order the first virtual electronic meeting in the history of the Tree Commission. Seems rather digital for such an analog thing as a tree, but I want to remind you, here's Paul. I want to remind you of just three things in terms of, I know some of you have heard this already, but three things in terms of this meeting. First of all, we are streaming live on social media and on the city's website. So bear that in mind. Secondly, we are going to go with the chat feature for those of us who are considered panelists, including staff. So if you want to use that feature during the meeting, if you want to communicate to somebody or answer a question, if somebody's presenting, that's fine. Anson really will be monitoring that. I won't be following that as much. And again, that is saved as a log, all those messages. So that is accessed through FOIA. So we want to bear that in mind. And did I say there were three things? Maybe there were only two things. Oh, the third thing is we are going to, everybody controls their mics unless there's an issue, in which case Anson rules. So if there's some kind of feedback or background noise, we would, of course, and I know you've all done this, but just as a matter of etiquette, if you're not speaking or about to speak or to answer a question, please keep your mic muted as much as possible. It just makes it easier for everybody else and saves you potential embarrassment in case somebody's in the house and does something you don't want everybody to hear. So we've got everybody. I can see everybody here. Looks like a couple of people are still connecting. So in interest of time, rather than go around, this is a very odd way to meet our 4 new members, but we're glad to meet them finally at long last. In the interest of time, rather than going around, I mean, you have all of our names you can see below. That's one of the great things about Zoom. Someday Anson will have some lovely little badges to put in front of us, some made out of wood once we meet again in person. But for now, what I'd just like to do is, by way of introduction, is just go through the list of new members and ask them to say maybe just a couple of words about why they were interested in joining the Tree Commission and what they hope to accomplish as a member of the commission. So we'll start with our first new member, Emily Cohn Miller.
Hi. Can you tell me again what I'm supposed to say? I'm off to a great start.
That's fine. Just in a couple of words, why you were interested in joining the commission and what you hope to accomplish to get out of working on this group with this group.
I joined. Well, I applied to join because I love trees and I worry about the trees in Charlottesville. And also I know that the inequalities in our city are exacerbated by trees and the absence of trees. So I thought, and I don't know much about city government, so I thought it'd be a good way to learn about city governance also.
Great.
Nice to meet everyone virtually.
Well, welcome. We're glad to have you, and we'll give you a wave for now. Someday we'll be able to actually see you in person.
Woohoo.
Jeff Jennings.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi, nice to meet you all, and I'm glad I made it through. There's a little last minute link sent to me, and I appreciate the efforts. I applied because I too am interested in the health of our community's trees, first and foremost. And I'm also interested in the placement of new ones and the placement of proper new ones, and whether they might be, if I can assist that way, whether they might be under power lines or adjacent to a building, that kind of thing. But I've been a landscape contractor and for 22 years, and I've worked locally, and I was a certified arborist, but I'm currently not a certified arborist due to just continuing education's credits. But I am, I do practice arboriculture and do advise my clients to the best of my ability on tree placement, tree health, pretty much pro tree. And I guess this all got started when I worked at Monticello for a long time as a gardener there, and saw the those huge, big, beautiful tulip poplars be maintained for years and years. And it was just a joy to see how they could maintain them and in a safe way. You know, they wanted to protect their visitors and they wanted to protect the house. And then eventually, unfortunately, you know, as you all know, they are deceased at this time, but maybe they made a good call. But anyway, I thought I'd just share all my history with the city and at the same time learn about city government.
Great. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you.
We have 2 Jeffs joining us. Jeff, is it, I assume it's Picelli? Do you pronounce it Picelli or with a soft C?
It's a hard C. Yeah, you
Hard
got
C.
it on the first try.
Okay.
Great. Mirroring both Emily and Jeff, I love trees. I graduated from college from SUNY Environmental Science and Forestry in upstate New York, where I did a lot of work with trees and in the forest. 3 out of the 4 summers that I was there, I worked on the forest operations crew and helped to manage the over 25,000 acres that the school owns and operates in upstate New York. Worked in Puerto Rico for a couple of years after graduation with ESF, with the University of Puerto Rico, and the Forest Service on a variety of projects. In my current capacity, I work for a private consulting firm doing environmental due diligence. And although I'm not actively doing a lot of forestry work, I feel like I use the trees and parks in and around Charlottesville, and would love to give back a little bit using my knowledge and whatever resources I can provide. And then, I've always been curious about city governance, and so it was kind of a perfect opportunity. Looking forward to it.
Great. Thanks. Welcome, Jeff. And the last of our 4 new members, Mark Zulenhofer, who is the representative for the Charlottesville area tree stewards and has been at past meetings, but maybe you can just say a couple of words for the group, Mark. You have to unmute.
My dad was a camp manager of a Christian camp in southern New Jersey, where I grew up in the woods with lots of different kinds of oak trees, and have always been interested in the woods and forests. And I like to do woodwork, so that was interesting. And I joined CATS because I wanted to understand more about the trees that provide the wood that I work with. And as a member of CATS, it became obvious after a little while that the intersection with CATS and the Charlottesville area tree stewards was important. And the person in CATS who was in that role wanted to step down. And so I applied for that position. So I'm interested in seeing how the CATS community of about 125 members can coordinate and work together with the Charlottesville Area Tree Commission.
Great. Good to see you again, Mark, and welcome as a member. On behalf of all of us in the commission, we're very excited to have you join us. You all bring great background and skills to complement the work we do. And even though you're joining us in it's fair to say, one of the most unusual times in all of our lifetimes, we hope that from this point forward, we're going to be able to engage more as a group and more with our new members. So we're full strength. We have the entire tree commission filled, and that's an exciting thing because we were working hard to accomplish that. So welcome. Next on the agenda, we're going to, I hope you had a chance to look at the March minutes, and I'll give a minute or two if you haven't, and then we can let Mike know if there are any changes that need to be made to the minutes from March. I know that was a long time ago. Maybe it brought back memories of actually sitting down in a room together, but have a look and let us know if there's anything we need to edit. They look good to everyone? You can just nod your heads. Okay. Even though technically we don't have to vote to approve, we could accept them. We have been in the habit of voting to approve the minutes. So we'll do that just by a collective nod of the head. Is there a motion? Somebody put up their hand. This is the old school way. Paul motions, Anthony seconds. All those in favor of approving the minutes, raise your hand or shake your head. Minutes approved. In the little protocol we sent out, most of which was provided by the city, and I added a few things in, I think, and we talked to Brian Wheeler about this, we don't vote on a lot as a body. And for things like the minutes, and there may be one other thing tonight, I think that we can do essentially a voice vote. But for things that we think more consequential and we actually want a recorded vote, I'll call the roster. There's no reason to call the roster and go through 13 names to approve the minutes. So we'll sort of split the difference on voting and do it that way for things that are less consequential. The last thing in my report before I turn it over to committee members, I sent out what I call a report on the past 6 months, which I intended to serve two purposes. The first was to document that the commission had continued individually as individual members, not as a body and not as committees, had continued to engage to the extent possible during these times in ways to preserve, protect our trees, to educate, to collaborate with others. And I thought it was important to be able to show that for the record, for the historical record. And second, and also to document how we got from the point of meeting last in March to today. I know some of you knew that because you inquired from time to time, and I will admit that I stopped sending out emails each month, keeping everybody abreast of what was going on, simply because I often didn't know. It took a while, but I wanted everybody to see how we reached this point. The second reason for putting this together is really to acknowledge the efforts of all of you in your ways to continue to advocate for our trees. And so aside from everything I just said, I just think it's very important for people to see collectively what was happening in this time. And I'm very grateful to all of you. I went back through, believe it or not, since March, about 600 emails. I get copied on everything so I could see what was going on. If I didn't respond or didn't join into all of the threads, it's because I simply didn't have time, but I saw the passion and the eagerness to continue. That said, it does not in any way, we know this, substitute for our work collectively as a body. And it really, in certain respects, has set us back. But for the efforts that you've all made individually, I fear we would have lost tremendous momentum. So, and this is what we have represented to Mike and Peggy and I, to City Council in our request to meet, that even though we didn't have urgent pandemic related business, the longer that we were not able to meet, essentially the farther behind we fell in our work. And so this is the time for us to meet. It would have been nice to do it a month earlier, but going forward, as you'll see from the report, last week at their meeting, City Council approved meetings for boards and commissions. I'm not sure if it's all of them or for the ones that had already been approved to meet, which we were one, obviously, through September and October. So we're going to figure out maybe slipping from our normal routine of meeting at the beginning and meeting at the end of the next 2 months, partly because there are some pressing things, including preparing the report, the data and the report to City Council, which we still plan to do. And Paul's been working hard on a visual presentation, and we have wonderful data work that was spearheaded by Roxanne White, who I know is listening in as a member of the public. So we are going to try to get those 2 meetings. They've been approved. The only complication is that we are still in a holding pattern, as you see from the report, in terms of committees and subcommittees. That does hamstring us because, as we all know, most of our work goes on between the monthly meetings. Most of the work goes on in committees and gets reported back. But as we all know, from going back almost a year, a little over a year, I guess, we are required to notice those meetings, which was one thing in the era of in-person meetings, but is another thing when meetings are electronic. And appreciating the city and City Council's concern about resources, and let alone to support boards and commissions, but committees as well. they had, since their May work session on this subject, they put a table the idea of allowing committees to meet. The city attorney also said that committees were not allowed to meet unless they were able to meet transparently and invite public participation, which of course we can't do without doing it electronically. And the way to do that electronically is through city communications. So all of that to say that we're grateful to have this opportunity, and we really appreciate the hard work of Brian and Joe and everybody in city communications. I know that they're supporting a lot of groups and a lot of meetings during the month. And I don't know what the answer is going to be about committees, but we will continue to do our best meeting in twos. You can meet in twos. And certainly you can adopt council's practice if you need to meet with Mike. That's a 221. He's a member of the commission, but he's also wears the hat of city arborist. So he's a staff person. So if you need to, you can meet, two of you to discuss issues. We're just going to need to go forward with that. The other option, which we don't need to decide tonight, but I'm just going to put it before all of you, is that we can have the committee meetings, but they would need to immediately precede our full commission meeting. It's a lot to ask of people, even once a month, to get together for 2 hours, let alone say we're going to gather for 3 or 4 hours so we can have committee meeting and then a committee meeting and then this meeting. It might be the option will be that we'll switch off and one committee will say we want our meeting this month and we'll do a public meeting for an hour with that committee so it doesn't impact everybody's schedule, but at least the meeting is happening and then we can slip into this meeting. I say this because what has been communicated to me a number of times in the city council work session and in communicating with Brian and the city clerk's office is that it's anticipated that we will continue to meet as a board, as a commission in this format for the foreseeable future. At one point I raised the question, does the foreseeable future, is that another way of saying a safe and effective and widely distributed vaccine? What that means, but certainly through the rest of this year, I would anticipate actually probably for the next 6 months, this is where we're going to meet. So again, that impacts our committees and we just have to find a way to continue to work around that and continue to get our work done. Are there any questions about anything in that report or anybody has a comment or follow up on that? Tim?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Just really briefly, that some of the codes and development committee's work includes, our participation in the Seville Plans Together steering committee. And that is one of like the widely sanctioned, ongoing city efforts. So there's sort of a release valve there, I guess, for some of that committee's work to happen within a broader process.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because obviously this is a time sensitive and critical thing, particularly with the code revision on zoning. And so that committee, you all are going to need to be, Mark, there's Mark. You, Mark, and Paul are really going to need to be able to take that and sort of feed back on behalf of the commission. Of course, we'll review it, but to actively participate in that process because we can't afford to miss that opportunity. There are a number of opportunities, frankly, we can't afford to miss. Peggy and I have been discussing, there are things that simply, we have been left behind. And part of the frustration, I understand, I've heard it from a number of you over the months, is that other groups which are not public bodies are going forward and commenting and weighing in and doing things. And meanwhile, the Tree Commission is not able to. Incidentally, we were told at the May City Council work session that even submitting a series of comments on behalf of the body was considered the body meeting. So one group had done that and the city attorney said that we couldn't comment on something. We couldn't comment officially or publicly as a group because that implied that we had gotten together and that there was no opportunity for public input or for the public to hear what was going on. So we really have been hamstrung and it's allowed other groups, Sierra Group, PEC, others are able to get together and gather and weigh in and we have to find ways to do that and hopefully, we will. In some ways, as you see from this report, we have been able to do that, but not to the extent that we would like to going forward. And certainly on the comprehensive plan and the zoning thing, we need to be in a position to do that. That, again, has been reflected in writing to City Council. in our last request, we pushed really hard on those issues. So, and again, they have a lot to deal with. So it's not to be critical. It's just they've heard it from us. Okay, well, we are now going to go on to member reports. We're 2 minutes behind, but I'm sure that members can pick up on that time. I think we'll start with members of education advocacy. I know that you've all seen, they sent out their list of priorities. I know Paul has something for us. I'm going to turn it over to Peggy as chair of the committee and let her sort of run, keeping in mind that codes and ordinances has a chunk of this time too. I don't know if they need as much time as you all, but we'll start with you guys and you can report to us.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes, good. Okay. Anson's on the committee, Paul's on the committee, and Emily, we're going to welcome you, I think, on our committee. We're excited about that. And we have Roxanne White, who used to be on the Tree Commission for years, who is our guiding star, and she helps us along quite a bit. We sent out to the priorities we have for this year is a very ambitious list, I know. I'm just going to hit the highlights right now. The first one is we want to educate the community about the value of trees. Paul has developed a presentation, which you're going to see in a minute. And then we are going to develop a plan to show it to government officials and other organizations. We also want to gauge closely with the low canopy neighborhoods. That's going to be a priority of ours to get more trees into those areas. We don't want to place our values on neighborhoods, but we want to work closely with them so they understand the link between trees, health, and energy cost. The second one is to collaborate with other organizations in the community that have the same interests we do. Roxanne and I have met with the Piedmont Environmental Council roundtable discussion twice now with about 30 other people, and that seems to be going well. We want to meet with NDS and the Environmental Sustainability Department of the Public Works. They developed a wonderful presentation called Greenprint. If you haven't seen it, we will send it out, but we want to get a presentation from them because they're going to be doing a carbon capture program, and we want to be an integral part of that team. The third one is to start a PR campaign with basically the whole community through to educate the public about trees and how environmental justice equals social justice. And we'll do that through social media and publications. Along with that, we want to work with the Arbor Committee and advertise to the public some of the interesting things we're doing now and some things we might do. For instance, we have this tree ordinance where we prize some of our wonderful trees in town and give them some protection. There are other things going on, like Harrisonburg has a wonderful program called Out of the Ashes, where they're recycling the ash trees, which of course are all coming down because of the emerald ash borer. And we also, of course, will advocate very closely for funding for trees, for maintenance and planting. And we want to make sure we have all our data and performance measures up on the website and the city's website and make that a more exciting place for people to come. So I think Paul's going to go next, unless you want to hear from the Codes and Practices Committee.
I'm ready. I can also sort of talk to both of those a little bit, but first I'm going to share my screen just so that, not that one, but this one. So what we're gonna, can everyone hear me? See the screen? Nods all around. All right. So what we're planning to do is I'm going to give a presentation that is a draft, but it's also saying, you know, it's really to explain to new members what the Tree Commission, what we do, how we interact with city governments. This is going to give you a very brief overview of what we are. And so this is our presentation goal. So the role of the Tree Commission, how it fits into the city government. Also, I'm talking about environmental justice as social justice, sort of the canopy inequalities in the city. We're also going to talk about trees in the current site plan approval process and development around the city. And then targeted solutions that the city and the Tree Commission can do to sort of help encourage what is currently a sort of declining canopy in the city. So this should be fun. So sit back, and some of this will be old news for some people and new for others. So first off, just who we are, the Tree Commission. So we have our guidelines, but really to advise the City Council, Planning Commission, and city staff on planting, preservation, and removal and protection of trees. So we're really working to help City Council, the Planning Commission, and city staff. That's our goal. And generally, our main guiding thing is to protect and improve the urban forest. So that's a pretty significantly broad scope that goes through everything from the code process to how development gets done, to how protection happens, to how planting is happening in communities, to how we educate people about trees in the community. So it's a broad topic. And then the primary groups that we work with within the sort of city system, first there's council, who we always have an annual presentation to them, and we're usually advocating for certain budget elements, such as, right now there can be no new trees planted without council approving them as a part of the CIP or the Capital Improvement Fund budgets. So every year we kind of go to council and say, here's what the state of the forest is, here's what things have worked in the past year, what hasn't. We also, with the Planning Commission, we can weigh in on large developments and site plans. If there's a major development happening in town, usually we're engaged to see how they're incorporating canopy and trees and soil volumes into that process. And then with city staff, if you can think about, there are lots of departments in the city staff. We're going to talk about 4 primary ones that several. So there's Neighborhood Development Services, or also known as NDS. They're doing a lot of things, but these are the ones that are primarily the Tree Commission's engaged with. With developments and site plan reviews, they're sort of coordinating that. They're also doing helping coordinate the development standards and codes. So they're kind of leading that effort generally. So we're kind of working with that process. Within Parks and Rec, their primary focus is on tree planting and preservation, as well as removal. They also are doing tree inventories, as well as annual data. And then every 5 years, we do an urban canopy assessment that the Parks and Rec contracts out, and then takes basically a snapshot of our current canopy, and then we compare that to past years. So we get the GIS data through LiDAR data. And so that's all happening. This is actually happening this year, this urban canopy assessment. So that's kind of an exciting thing that these new that the new members will get to see and be a part of. And then Public Works, they're really doing climate and sustainability within Public Works. That's a key element to what we, the Green Prints publication that recently came out. So they're really looking at the comprehensive goals for the city and sustainability. They're also focused on street and sidewalk repair that often interacts with trees and roots and such. And so they're really they're kind of taking care of our trees, and our sidewalks and curbs and such that are closely associated with the health of our trees. And then finally, the utilities department is looking at underground utilities and water and gas. And so Mike and Todd and everyone, I know this is very broad, so I apologize if I didn't include something on here or another group. But anyway, hopefully this gives you a brief introduction to the various groups and how we interact with them in the city. There's other groups as well. The Community Climate Collaborative is a nonprofit in Charlottesville. It's working on how to create good climate change. There's Charlottesville area tree stewards who we work with quite often. We always have a representative, Mark Zulenhofer. I'm also an associate member of the tree stewards. Peggy is a member. A lot of us are actually members of the tree stewards, a good group. So that's sort of a brief introduction. And now we're just going to talk about, there's been a lot of discussion. There's a lot of great articles out. There's a lot of discussion about sort of canopy inequality in our cities and what that leads to. So if you haven't heard of this topic before, we'll talk about that today a little bit. So this is an article. We presented this to council last year's State of the Forest. This is an article in the Washington Post talking about how studies showing that city neighborhoods, the poor ones, are often hotter than the wealthy neighborhoods. And what they found in that article was that there are these hot spots, and in these hot spots, there are also higher amounts of heat-related illnesses. So less shade equals, they were actually mapping where they were having calls for heat-related illnesses. That's heat stroke, heat exhaustion, heat cramps, and heat is actually the #1 most deadly weather-related hazard in the US. So that's more than hurricanes, more than tornadoes, more than floods. It is the single biggest health risk in this country. So there's also elements of low canopy, such as lower asthma, increased air quality. This is written a little backwards, but lower asthma rates. There's also low canopy areas are prone to higher blood pressure, higher obesity rates, higher attention deficit disorder rates. So there are other things associated with canopy that are really critical to consider as well. But when we looked at these heat-related calls to 911 in DC, they also found a correlation between the temperature and the vegetation maps of DC, finding a strong correlation between where there were trees, you had lower temperatures, and where there were not trees, you had higher temperatures. This also started to correspond to, this is another study that is looking at redlining practices. Essentially, this is where federal maps graded neighborhoods and sort of that basically led to this decades of inequality in our neighborhoods, where certain neighborhoods could not be approved for home ownership. So and this was really to segregate populations. So Black neighborhoods were, it was very difficult for them to ever own a home because they couldn't receive any federally backed loans. And that has been the main way to really accrue wealth in this country, is through property ownership. So if you have no way to do that, you're sort of constantly suppressed. But those neighborhoods often were not invested in from a city infrastructure standpoint, from a utility standpoint, from a sidewalk standpoint. So there was gross sort of negligence in these areas over decades that are still transpire to today. You can still look in Charlottesville and see that there were redlining practices in Charlottesville that led to sort of lower home ownership, lower investment in those communities, and also led to lower shade, which we'll get into some of these other diagrams in a little bit about shade. So we mentioned the Green Prints document that came out recently. This was a result of the 2014 urban canopy assessment, where we looked at really all the data. This will all be updated this year, fortunately, but this was looking at the different areas of the different communities in Charlottesville and where the canopies were strongest and where they were the lowest. And you'll see here, the lowest percentages are Star Hill and the 10th and Page neighborhoods. These are primarily the poor neighborhoods. We're locating these as the low-income neighborhoods are the CDBG, the Charlottesville Development Block Grant neighborhoods. These receive block grants from the city, or from federally. I forget who exactly is giving this, but nonetheless, these are designated as low-income neighborhoods. This is 10th and Page, Rose Hill, Belmont, Fifeville, and Ridge Street. You'll notice that Star Hill and 10th and Page have less than 20%. A number of studies have shown that 20% canopy is the absolute minimum. Below that, there's high risks, high stress risk. And as you increase canopy, studies have shown that you see a faster stress recovery. So these are actually more desirable places to live when they have more canopy associated with them. So as you get further down into other neighborhoods, they become more desirable to live in. And then if you go into sort of microclimates of each of these neighborhoods, you know that downtown Belmont has a lot more shade trees in Old Belmont than, say, South Belmont, which has very few trees. So some of these are more varied as you dig into these. But our goal for our neighborhoods really is 40%. That should be our sort of standard set for the goal. So how do we get a lot of these low canopy neighborhoods to have higher canopy rates to improve people's health, improve people's sort of community aspects, walkability and such. This is what those streets look like, and this is what that inequality looks like in our streets and how that's transpired over time. This is looking at the 10th and Page neighborhood. So you can compare 10th and Page neighborhood to the North Downtown neighborhood. You can see just some slight differences. You notice The utilities are all concentrated on one side, on the overhead utilities. So there's actually one side that can provide for canopy trees. You can also see that this asphalt has been cut. That's telling you that there are underground utilities happening that have been replaced possibly in this area. Maybe they're just, well, who knows which ones they are. But it's a very different look than here, where they have some utilities on this side going in all directions. They have, I mean, this is so sad that this is the state of Charlottesville and how unequal it is right in our city. You can also see a similar thing, and this is again that South Belmont area, and what the look of those seats are. I mean, we don't have an investment in the sidewalks from an infrastructure standpoint. Again, you have utilities on both sides of the streets. Then you compare that to other areas of Belmont where the trees are actually planted right underneath the power lines. The power companies have sort of allowed those power lines to grow through those trees as opposed to topping them, and sort of carefully prune them because they're sort of mature and nice neighborhoods. And so there's a clear disparity. Also, you can see walkable streets, new trees being planted in a sort of a more generous right-of-way median planting area that you really don't see in these other neighborhoods. I mean, these actually, it's hard to even walk on the sidewalks because you have power poles and such. Utilities sort of just drop to wherever on the side. So this is sort of an after the fact, as opposed to sort of sinking them into the streets or providing wide sidewalks. So we see this disparity. We also see heat island effect happening in Charlottesville. So this is a map looking, this is created by the director for the Virginia Science Museum, Dr. Hoffman. Anyway, he's a great guy, and he's done this for Charlottesville, looking at sort of the heat mapping. And if you actually compare this to our block grant neighborhoods, our low-income neighborhoods in Charlottesville, you'll see a correlation between where the hottest parts of the city are and where our lowest income neighborhoods are in Charlottesville. You also see, this came out recently, thanks to the Charlottesville Climate Collaborative, that there are higher energy costs. The highest energy costs in Charlottesville are happening in 10th and Page neighborhoods, also along Jefferson Park, and as well as Fifeville and Ridge Street neighborhoods. So we're seeing, not only are we seeing more inhospitable, low canopy neighborhoods in our city, we're seeing higher energy costs, higher costs on those neighborhoods as well, through sort of no shade. It'll get better. We're going to work on some solutions to all this. Don't worry, I'm not trying to depress everybody. We're going to do a little more depressing things. This is going to go into trees and development throughout the city, but this is just the current process. Even looking at some of our codes, this is one of our codes are saying, talking about standards for townhouse developments. So even a townhouse development that has a private street or access or easement, it should have minimum standards such as, trees should be planted along the frontage of the street easement at 50-foot intervals. Those should always be shaded streets in our new townhouse developments. But these are all new developments. This is happening, and we don't see trees placed along the street edge. We're seeing wide streets, very wide streets, and very little canopy kind of crammed in occasionally in some people's front yards if they want to add that themselves. But this is not really a walkable community that we're creating. These are new communities with large amounts of residents and people living in them. So we're not actually designing our new communities to look like what we want, or even our old communities to look like. So you can see this with Burnett Commons, another area. Again, no trees present for street frontage in these areas. Same for the across the street off Elliott Avenue, the Burnett Commons Part 3, part of the Habitat for Humanity homes that are being developed. And again, no canopy trees, no shade trees putting in. And this is really for developers to maximize their footprints in order to get the most profits out of their lots. And so we're not really enforcing our codes currently and seeing a lot of sort of questionable decision making at sort of in these places. Again, that same habitat. These streets are not hospitable, welcoming new developments. These aren't great assets for our residents. But it's really prioritizing development at all costs and development profits. This is looking at just tree preservation in the city and how the current way that site plans are submitted are very difficult to read, they're very difficult to interpret, and they're very difficult to enforce. We also have no penalties in our enforcement code. So a developer, even though they promise to protect this tree, can do anything they want to that tree throughout the process and face no fines, no penalties, no repercussions whatsoever. And we're working on changing our codes to do something about this, but this is infuriating to watch, and there's very little enforcement happening on the ground. While we could be stopping construction for lack of following the actual requirements for tree protection, it rarely, if ever, has happened in the city of Charlottesville. This is a tree that's being proposed for preservation. We've called it out. They've done all this effort to build a tree, the building around the tree, yet they have pruned off over half the canopy to build this building. And then you can see half the canopy on the ground here. They're sort of taking it away. This is phase 1 of the development. Phase 2 of the development, that same tree had the majority of its remaining roots severed through utility work that never showed up in the preservation plan. So the plan reviewers never knew that you were going to lose the rest of that tree's roots through new utility work that could have been located in the street or other locations, but it wasn't. So there's no way for planners to see that. And then that tree that we looked at in the beginning, phase 2 of construction now has basically all the critical root zones of that tree being damaged significantly. So again, you're stressing out trees that are supposed to be saved per the plan review process, but are not in reality being saved. And finally, this is the Friendship Court development. Again, these trees are being proposed to be saved, but what's actually being proposed next to them is a significantly tall building with a deep garage parking. So you're undermining all the roots of that. So high probability that even though we're saving these trees in plan, we're not saving them in reality. So a similar project happening just down the street is looking at, you can see once you start building those garages, you have a layback zone for getting the sheeting and shoring in and building these garage walls that are impacting those root zones. This is actually a former tree right here located in a similar location to how these trees are located. So you can see that, if you're building a garage, you're having a layback zone and, these major walls, so you're losing all the root zones of those trees, and all the plan reviewer sees is the final grades that go right to the flush to the, the face of the buildings. They say, well, they're not impacting the root zones because they have the same grades as before. So we're seeing a disconnect between the plan review process and the actual realities in the construction process in the field. And then we're concerned about what are happening in future projects. What's happening in Friendship Court in phase 2? Are these trees on the chopping block? These trees are identified as some of the best street trees in our Streets That Work guiding documents. These sort of our prized streetscapes in Charlottesville, and they're all being threatened. Same with all these terrific white oaks, all being threatened at the sort of compromise of maximum footprints and developments. Also, we're seeing a disconnect between certain departments. If utilities is doing work, they may not be calling Parks and Rec to sort of convey that they're doing work, and you can see significant impacts to the structural root zone in this area. Had they sort of notified Parks and Rec in advance of this, maybe there would have been some sort of on-the-field coordination that could have protected some of these trees. These trees, you go out the next day, they actually had fallen over because the structural root zones had been compromised so badly by this kind of emergency utility work here. So, sort of a lack of coordination happening in some departments for the protection of trees. So it's just looking at those departments. NDS, we see that they're at times not enforcing codes that exist. They're not enforcing tree protection on site. They're not really enforcing replacement BMPs for trees that are impacted. Public Works, they worked on this green prints document. That was a terrific document, but there was very little engagement with the Tree Commission about the report or the final report. We were involved in some of the documents that went into it, but not really in what was being presented there. So sort of a disconnect between how we engage with Public Works there. Also, there's minimal consideration of critical root zones, as we've shown in that last image. And then Parks and Rec is sort of seeing minimal, their role is not to be planners. They're not looking out for, how are we doing mass canopy protection and preservation and planning. Their role is really focused on tree, maintenance and removals and some sort of, and streetscape replacements. So some new trees, but it's not a large scale planning effort. Mike's got his hands totally full with just managing the entire city's canopy in the public areas. So after a big storm, you won't see him or hear from him for a bit because he's taking care of all that. So there's also, the site plan process as well. Sort of, there's certain codes that aren't being enforced. They're not asked to show up to enforce site plans. That is really NDS's role, and the sediment, erosion sediment control sort of oversight is more of a priority than the tree oversight. So Parks and Rec is not really involved in the actual enforcement of the site plan process. So where do we go from here? This is a few ideas here. So in the past, since 2015, the Tree Commission has had a number of projects where we are receiving site plans and we're providing advisory comments on those. And that's really part of the mission of the Tree Commission, is to protect and improve the urban canopy. And we have a lot of talent reading site plans on the commission who can sort of look at these and know the codes and say, well, these are opportunities, these are areas where maybe we've missed, and thinking about the big picture one. So we've worked on a lot of advisory comments for these groups. We're not a binding commentary group. Our comments are just really to help the developer sort of meet the best management practices or make sure they're meeting the city's codes. But since the new city management has taken over, no site plans have been shared with the Tree Commission in late 2019 or 2020, and there's been a sort of a direct correlation between the lack of interest in sharing any sort of site plan process with the Tree Commission, with the new city management. Right now, there's ways that we can improve the site plan process transparency. If the commission was looking at these, right now we have these sort of projects in review. It tells you the project name, where it's located, the planning area, and therefore the planner associated with that, what the description is. But what's missing is when the submission date is due, when actually, when they have to submit files, when multiple dates are occurring, if they have to do multiple resubmissions. So when has this been received by the city? And when have they been re-receiving these submissions? Also, when staff responses are due. So if the Tree Commission were to respond on comments, we would need to know when they're actually due for comments. And this is a standard PDF that's updated regularly. So this is a template that could just be updated. So a preliminary approval date could be added to these. So you can track these projects better, more clearly as an advisory group by just adding a few columns to this document. You can also improve the site plan submission process with, right now there are no preserved trees on the utility plan. So if a civil engineer is doing a utility plan, they're not looking at the critical root zones of trees that are actually intended to be preserved. So they have no connection to the preservation aspect. So the reviewer can't actually assess how plans are preserving trees. Also, there's no preserved trees showing up on grading plans often done by, again, civil engineers, and there's no, so if they're cutting through the entire critical root zone and regrading that area, you can't tell that to be the case without sort of flipping between pages and sort of guessing. And also, there's no proposed grading on the planting plans. So that's another way that, if you were just, if say, Parks and Rec was just looking at the planting plan, they could then look at that planting plan and understand right away with one plan if grades were impacting preserved trees or not. So these are very simple things that you can just change in your requirements for what developers would submit to the city. And very easy, click on a layer, click off a layer to get these to show up on drawings. I'll give a quick overview on the guiding documents of Charlottesville city process for planning. So you have your comprehensive plan. This is your sort of broad plan that sort of, here's what we want. We want to be, tree-lined streets, and we want to have, everything we want in our city is in our comprehensive plan. That's being updated right now. Then we have our standards and design manual, this sort of sharpening that into actual tangible results, so that you say, here's our metrics. This is what we're trying to meet. So we should be hitting our, this is how we're preserving our trees. This is how we're sort of planning for what our soil type should be, or what our, anyway, lots of things like that. And then finally, then there's our codes and our ordinances. And this is that nitty gritty section where it's just tons of text. And that is really saying exactly what specifically you have to do as a developer to get this built. So these are your sort of, and then you have your tree packet with your master tree list. The tree packet itself is not really a guiding, required document, but the master tree list is something that often is referred to, that is sort of that the developers should meet on their drawings, so they're not planting all invasive trees or certain monoculture of one species. And then advisory documents, the green print one we talked about before, looking at sort of all the green infrastructure in the city. This is brand new. Streets at Work. This was sort of a big vision document that was intended to lead the process for our comp plan and standards and design manual and codes and ordinances update. So this is sort of our what are the best streets out there kind of plan. The downtown mall report. This was an assessment done at the downtown mall, looking at the trees, the health of the trees, and the projection of their future health, and looking at some of their hazards and how to start thinking about the future of the downtown mall trees, because a number of them are showing significant decline in canopy stress. Tree preservation best management practices. This is just the BMPs. Best management practice. This is actually a great document showing how to set up your chain link fencing for tree protection, how to set up your root zones, how to protect your trees. And this is often referred to in site plan review. Urban forest management plan, and then there's our urban canopy assessments that we do every 5 years. And then an urban forest assessment, which is a little different than we did only in 2008, that basically located all of our public works trees, streetscape trees in a GIS database. And a very helpful tool we have now. So that's a lot. So, but know is here. You don't have to memorize all this. You can write it down. You can have this presentation. But know this is what these documents are. So right now, I'm going to talk a little bit too about what we're doing with the codes committee. And this is really Mark and Tim and I are engaged in this. But
Paul, can I just do a quick time check?
Yeah, 5 minutes to the top of the hour. And I've got another, this is the wrap up, maybe 6 more slides.
Okay, I just want to leave enough time for Mark, his committee, and for Mike. So
yeah, and I'm on Mark's committee, and some of this is tied to what we're presenting for Mark's committee. So Mark's committee is not presenting anything but this, but we're going to talk about
great.
5
Perfect.
minutes. So
Perfect.
we're consolidating committee stuff. So we did an overhaul of the chapter 10 of the Standards and Design Manual last year. This is chapter 10. We sort of renamed it. We worked through all these things with Mike and city staff to sort of get the best information into our Standards and Design Manual. There's still a number of things that were left out last minute just due to timing of the consultant. So we need to still update that. So we're trying to find out when we need to sort of continue that update. And then right now, Tim, do you think this is a good time for you to jump in and just kind of give a quick discussion about this process?
Yeah, I think it is. Thanks, Paul. So as it's been mentioned, the Tree Commission has a liaison to an appointed member to the CBO Plans Together Steering Committee. And those meetings began in March, and there's been, I think, 4 rounds of steering committee meetings since it started. The first was in person, and it's all become virtual since then, of course. But as this graphic indicates, the initial emphasis was on, laying the groundwork for how this is a 3-pronged effort. But the initial focus had been on the affordable housing plan, which I guess is going to become part of the comprehensive plan, which is sort of the second phase of this overall process. And I think it was just Monday, the steering committee met for the first time to focus on the comprehensive plan portion of this overall process. So there's been some opportunity to speak to the importance of our urban forest or community forest, the role of trees, not just for environmental sustainability, but also, as it's been said tonight, you know, for the social justice and sort of the racial inequalities that exist in our city. Part of that is environmental quality and, you know, a lack of canopy in our historically Black neighborhoods. So I've kind of been a member of that group, waiting for my chance to kind of really drop that information and just kind of emphasize the importance of trees in residential neighborhoods and commercial neighborhoods, and the opportunity to look at this from a sort of demographic and socioeconomic standpoint and not just an environmental standpoint. As Paul has kind of indicated, you know, there's a role for the Tree Commission to help contribute to the conversation about the comprehensive plan. That's going to be the chance to strengthen the language in a sort of visionary or aspirational way about this is how we want our community to change over time. But really the essential part will be making sure that those aspirations are mirrored when the zoning ordinance is updated and the codes are amended, and actually, you know, update the required aspects of our city's, you know, guiding documents. That whole portion, the zoning update, is going to happen towards the end, as you can see, or at least not really underway at this time. But Mark and Paul and I have been having discussions intermittently to make sure that we're prepared to identify any deficiencies that we see, to provide recommendations on how the code could be amended, and just make sure that the city's consultants for this process, as well as city staff, just have as much as they can be given from this commission to make that work, you know, efficient and successful. I don't know that I'm prepared to really go into
I think that's a good overview. I think that's great. I mean, I think what we're trying to say is we're really just starting the process of the comprehensive plan, and mostly it's been about affordable housing right now. And that we'll eventually be getting into actually the zone edits and such, and we'll have, you know, our subcommittee will be working towards that. So not too much else to get to, but so we'll continue doing this. We're also going to, one thing that is kind of obvious is how to improve interdepartmental coordination about the canopy. So we have been advocating for an urban forester position in NDS for years, and it's highly, highly unlikely that will ever happen. There's just budget shortfalls and no new staff hires and such. So there's a lot of other priority areas. One thing we're going to begin petitioning for more often, more permanently, is to have a permanent public works member coming to all tree commission meetings. I mean, given that public works, which typically, well, anyway, they're involved in sustainability. They're involved in sort of the big vision aspects of the city. We think they are sort of critical members of looking at the vision planning for the canopy in the city. So we think that should be a new role. And then, you know, option 3, if that doesn't really work, shifting the tree commission to be staffed by public works in the sustainability departments, which is more similar to Richmond, Harrisonburg, and other Virginia cities and their tree commissions. Right now, we're under Parks and Rec, which is more of a maintenance role and not really a guiding, a planning role. So if that was the case, or maybe a hybrid of both, is really option 2, kind of the better of them. But anyway, that's that one. And then finally, just to note, I mean, the city, do we want to be known as the city that loses its canopy? I mean, we've lost 5% of total tree canopy from in the 2004 to 2014. That correlates to roughly an average of 400 acres of canopy lost in 10 years. In this next year, we'll get new data that says what the numbers in 2019 are. And hopefully that doesn't go down further. Hopefully that increases. Hopefully we've had our new trees we've been planting growing in a way that is adding to canopy. We'll find out this year. But you know, there is real concern. You know, the city goal is 200 trees a year. And we're not meeting that. You know, this is actually looking at 2017, 2018, 2019, the green being plantings, the pink being removals. And you can see that we're actually, in Parks and Rec plantings, we're actually having a net loss every year of removals to plantings. And, you know, so we're actually, you know, not meeting our city vision for tree-lined streets and such. There's really no plan to improve the urban canopy at a larger scale. It's sort of a piecemeal kind of replacement plan intact currently. There's lots of this GIS data that every year Mike updates. He basically collects all the data that he's putting in every new tree, where it is located from a GIS standpoint, who puts it in, where it goes, what neighborhood, and we get these great little printouts at the end of the year that we then convey to council and other groups to really convey what's happening every year. So you know, you can see that the types of trees we're, you know, if we're looking at large canopy trees or we're planting small canopy trees. In 2017, we were planting more small canopy trees, and then there was an adjustment once Mike was sort of behind the reins and sort of adding more canopy trees to the city. Other ones are, what are other departments doing? We knew that when there was the John Warner Parkway project going in, VDOT planted a lot of trees in that project, and sort of we had a major influx of trees that year. But then we see that VDOT's, you know, smaller influence in other years, and Parks and Rec has had increased influence. So we're capturing these to convey to council what is the changing demographic of our trees and how we're planting and changing the urban canopy. And we're also conveying, I mean, watch out for this chart here. We're also conveying the budgets. Don't look too close. A lot of numbers. But what are the funding needs for Parks and Rec, as well as other groups, to plant new trees every year? What are the needs for, you know, so we request funds. So in summary, last year, 2019, council approved funding for annual tree planting budget. We requested 100,000 in 2019, about 220 trees. They initially approved 75,000, about 170 trees. We weren't meeting our annual goal, but it's still a lot better than not meeting our goal. But then once COVID-19 impacts hit the budget, the council took out all new trees for this year. So, so the council also did not request and did not fund. There's a lot of heavy losses and removals associated with emerald ash borer. There's a lot of ash trees coming down, and there's costs associated with removing each of those dead trees. And we were trying not to have that come out of the operating budget for Parks and Rec. And so, but the council did not approve that. So we're still advocating for these things, and sometimes council really gets behind it and helps, and other times they're not so much. So, you know, these were sort of what we went to council with last year, saying like, we want a city forester and NDS. We want to have site plans that the tree commission can review again. We want to see 0 setbacks from all zoning codes. So we're not, you know, we're getting walkable streets. You know, what we've done from a prioritizing low canopy in neighborhoods, this is something that we could not, Parks and Rec in the city was not willing to plant on private property. And knowing that we have really low right-of-ways, we worked with the tree stewards to create a free trees program in low canopy neighborhoods. And we started this in Belmont because there was a lot of public right-of-way available and a lot of, private area to plant in Belmont. So we actually knocked on doors and handed out flyers, asked if people wanted a free tree in their front yard. We sort of, again, chose these based on trees with the most available planting area. So we picked these block grant neighborhoods that had the most available planting area. So our best chance of getting in as many trees as possible. Belmont was our first candidate to go after that. So we actually organized these meetings. We knocked on doors, got people to sort of sign up. We had volunteers from the homeowners, as well as CATS members and tree commission members working at planting these trees in people's yards. And this was a great success. People really loved it. And it was a lot of fun as well. But anyway, these are programs so you can see how we're sort of making change by planting in private properties. And we think the next generation of city planning is finding a way to get more trees planted in these low-income neighborhoods on private property. How do we start funding that? How do we start making change for that into these new neighborhoods? So these are our sort of steps that we've talked about, what are our options going forward and our plan ahead. And I think I've talked way too much. So thank you everyone for listening. And anyway, These are really are breaking up into our subcommittees. So all of this work has been done based on our interests. So Jeff and Emily and Mark and Jeff, if you have, I think you've already talked to to Brian about getting into these groups, but if there's something that you're interested in, this is where it's your opportunity to sort of give it life. So all of the things we've talked about to date are passions of the education group, those members, or the codes and development group, and those members, or the arbor group and those members. So these are all the things we've been doing together by planting trees, by working on advocacy, by working on our code process. So where you see opportunity, this is where you get to, in our subcommittees, we really try to break out and sort of brainstorm ideas and okay, what do we want to focus on? How do we want to fix things? And we realized that the first month or two or three that you're going to be kind of getting the lay of the land, but hopefully this is a good introduction to what we do as a tree commission, and sort of inspire everyone to kind of rally forth. All right.
Thanks, Paul. That's actually tremendous on many levels. And I want to thank you and everybody who worked on it. I know it's something that we've wanted to do, you've wanted to do for a long time. This was the time to do it. And I know that you all contributed your own personal time and energy to do this. As for it being I hadn't thought of it this way, but it actually is a perfect orientation for the new members. They have access to all of the documents. They were sent access to the files, so they had a chance to see them reflected in your presentation, and I'm sure they're going to have a lot of questions going forward. I should say that I did not speak to each of the members simply about the new members about committee assignments, simply because all of their interests seem to slot so perfectly into these groups, which is really a testament to our efforts to get some really first-class new members on the commission. So I think, and by the way, you did it exactly in 35 minutes. So that was perfect. Your timing was excellent. I think that since it's a first look for most people, you're going to send it around to everybody afterwards, I'm sure, if you haven't already done so, to invite some comments and feedback. And perhaps maybe we can, visit some of that at the next meeting as well. Unless somebody's chomping at the bit to say something right at the moment. I think maybe give the commission and staff some time to digest. But if there is somebody who wants to say something, we have a couple of minutes. Any member want to chime in? Okay, well, yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say one of the great things about the GIS work that the city has been doing is that they've created a database with all these trees that they keep relatively up to date. And recently, I don't know if anybody saw it, but some apps were created off of that database. So there's some ways for community outreach there, and that's been pretty exciting.
Yeah. I think this is a great segue into Mike's report. He has a number of things to report on, and some of them will touch on some of Paul's presentation. So for new members in particular, I think this is really beneficial when you hear Mike make his report. I do want to say, and Paul touched on this, but I do want to say that Mike is tasked with a lot, and particularly in these times with the pandemic, with recent storms. There have been a number of storms, as we know, especially in the summer. I was with Mike in the cemetery when after a large tree went down. So I know he has had to deal with that. And he's also had to deal with picking up the work of retired colleagues. So he is going to make essentially a report that combines a number of items on our annual calendar that's spread out from May through this month. There are a couple of things where he and I have discussed, like the annual dashboard, which normally the committee would have met and we would have all that data and we'd have pretty graphs to show you. That's going to be next month. Mike has made some effort towards that, but again, there's just so much going on in these unusual times. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike. He has a number of things, as you can see on the agenda, and it's yours, Mike, for 40 minutes if you need it.
Hey, great, thanks. It's nice to see everyone again. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the urban forester for the city of Charlottesville. And we're going to start with reviewing the budget information from the last fiscal year. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, can everybody see the spreadsheet that was in your agenda packet? Okay. So for those of you that are new to city government, the capital improvement projects are things like, in our area, it would refer to tree planting and the mall tree study and things. Capital improvements are improvements to infrastructure and things in the city. And then, which is different than our operating budget, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So historically, the tree commission has been a tremendous advocate for tree planting, and that's sort of what this this budget sheet is telling a story, basically about how much we spent on tree planting and how much we've been allocated for it in the past. But what's new to this sheet, obviously, is the end of the year, fiscal year 2020. So it will show that what was requested, as Paul mentioned, was $75,000 for tree planting, and $50,000 was approved. So we have this existing carryover of $109,725, and $100,000 of those dollars are for the mall tree study, which is separate than planting. So we had, so it shows as our CRP funding $159,725, and then for the year we spent $52,075 to plant 156 trees. So as Paul had mentioned before, due to the pandemic, we were not allocated funding for this current fiscal year for tree planting, but we are able to use what was left over from last year, which is $7,650. So we expect that to be enough to plant about 21 trees, which we can talk about more in a little bit. But that's how, for capital improvement projects, that's how that ended up for the fiscal year. And the $100,000 from the mall tree study is still intact. I know that's pretty quickly, but are there any questions?
Yes.
Sure.
Mike?
Yes.
I've consulted with my budget analyzer, right? And, you know, obviously she did budgets for the county for so many years. He was suggesting down under expenditures, when in the column budget,
Okay.
you should have, when you look at the mall tree preservation, we should be carrying that forward every year in the budget. It's not actually spent, but it's still in the budget, for instance, for 2020. She's suggesting you should have $100,000 there. And then the budget for 2021, you carry, the budget is still $100,000. I mean, the actual would be zero. And then, do you see what I'm saying?
No, you're saying for under expenditures for mall tree preservation.
Forward every year.
Okay, yeah, I'm not sure why it would fit under expenditures though.
Because it wasn't spent in 2019.
Correct.
Because it was a budget, but it's still in the budget for 2020. And
I see. Just keep it in the budget column, not the actual.
Just in the budget column, not
actually
spent, but it should be in the budget column.
Sure.
And the same thing for tree planting. In the budget column, it should be 7,650 because that's what we're budgeting for this year. Whether we spend it or not, that in the actual. You see what I'm saying?
Sure, we can change that.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Okay, can you still see my screen? Okay. Now we're going to talk about the operating budget is used for storm damage, trees, removals, pruning, any other forestry applications that essentially, but that's primarily what it's used for. So previously we've been given $218,000 a year, and that's sort of been sufficient for what we need. So we did essentially spent the entire budget. There's $7,570 left over that was unused at the end of last fiscal year. Are there any questions about the operating budget?
Yeah, I have a quick one, Mike, just about
Yes.
the operating budget. So is the 218, that's what you have, or is that carryover at all, or is that just the annual budget for trees that you have?
It's the annual budget for trees, and so like this $7,570 did not carry over.
Got it. And then within that, how much of that do you suspect was emerald? Was there any of it that was used for ash tree removal?
Sure.
And if so, what percentage do you think that was?
I wouldn't say it was a huge percentage, but there's definitely, probably several $1,000s. But it's something I can go and find out.
Just kind of curious of ballpark. If it's say it's $10,000 as a top, it's one thing if it's up $50,000. Just curious how much of it is there really in there? As we were sort of advocating for, that $50,000 for ash removal, are you keeping ash trees standing? I mean, I know there are some that are dying and that you're keeping standing, but
Yes.
has that impacted your current work and how you're thinking through the process by not getting that funding? And would we have been able to spend that 50,000?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I think, I'm just kind of deferring the removals at this point, essentially. Does that sort of answer your question? I'd hate to give you a number on how much we did.
No, that's fine. And this is for last year as
Right.
well. So the budget was for next year. I'm just curious, what those costs are and how do they project into the upcoming year. But
Mhm.
So
I have,
it'd be good if we have to go back to council again, it'd be nice to kind of keep track of those costs somehow on your end, that we could convey to council, this cost us this much this year, so we could track the removals for ash trees.
Yeah, it's really easy to find out, so I can look at that.
Thanks.
Mike, I just
Yes.
have a question. The 61,000 that you're carrying over, so
Mhm.
that's actually planned work, or is that just leftover from the main tree maintenance contract?
So $61,300. So that is work that a purchase order has already been cut for. So, I mean, it's not really carryover. It's like you've created the job and you're just doing it later after the fiscal year.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So the money's already accounted for.
Okay. One thing, we really worked hard to, the tree commission, to get the $50,000 for proactive tree
Mhm.
maintenance care for some of our older trees and important trees. And I'm wondering if this report could look a little bit more like a CIP, so we'd have a line item for that to see how it's being spent or is being spent.
Sure.
Expenditures, for the tree maintenance, for the proactive and the planting. I mean, could this be broken down? Because this includes planting too, or does this include planting, or does it?
No. Yeah. So this is just, pruning, removal, storm damage, essentially. There's some stump grinding and some other things in there too. But
I mean,
that
would it be hard to track the kind of proactive? I mean, just because that was really a big thing for us to get that in there.
Not at all. That's something that we've looked at before, and I've made pie charts sort of what kind of city property the work is being done and what is being done. Is it removals, storm damage, and things? So that's something we can look at. So.
Okay.
Peggy, you're referring as well to actual dollars?
Yes.
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
And again, just to be clear, the 7570, that was unused, but that doesn't roll over.
Correct.
Opportunity for any new members? if you're like me at the first meeting, maybe your eyes are rolling. I'm not a budget person, but is this relatively straightforward? Any questions from new members?
I just had a question in regards to kind of piggybacking off of the ash question. Would we have an estimate of what the cost would be to remove identified ash trees with issues?
We had done, and sort of a rough estimate. So I mean, Charlottesville, like most of Virginia, is 1% to 2% ash. So we have trees in the forest that are really not going to be needed to be addressed. And then we have other trees, obviously, in parks and schools and over trails and things that obviously we will have to deal with. So as far as like a comprehensive cost study has not been done.
And just for clarification, there are a series of priority trees that have been identified that are treated every 2 years for emerald ash borer as well, just so that's clear for everyone new.
Sure.
Okay, Mike, I think you can proceed.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
So the 218,000, is that the budget for the tree, for everything, for maintenance, planting, preservation? Is that all of it that comes from the city?
No. So back to the CIP, the tree planting money comes from the CIP and is historically been $50,000. That's a separate pot of money from the operating budget. The operating budget is just storm damage removal, pruning, and some stump grinding, things like that.
I see.
But mulch and watering, Mike, do they come into another category?
Yeah, that's another parks operating budget that's separate. So that's not in this.
Gotcha.
So a lot of this is just contracted services with a tree care professional.
Thank you.
Mike, real quick, could you just go over the mall preservation number? Is there like a plan for that to be done, or is that money allotted for tree maintenance along the mall specifically? Can you just kind of give an overview of
Sure.
what that money is going to?
Sure. The Jim Urban in 2016, I believe, he had done an initial report, was essentially a snapshot of the mall. He kind of identified some problems on the mall and some things, and it got people thinking about a long-term strategy for replacement of trees on the mall, since this is, it's a living thing that's going to inevitably have to be replaced. The $100,000 was allocated essentially to get some prescriptive ideas of how we're going to address, keeping the trees alive and sort of different replacement strategies that we could actually take and, be able to use, was for the $100,000 mall study.
And that'll just carry over until that work is done.
That's correct.
Got it. Is there a plan or a time frame in which you guys are looking to do that?
I would love to have had it done myself. As soon as it's difficult for us to kind of work on this year because of the pandemic and we're missing some staff.
Sure.
So I'd love to give you a time frame. I don't have that right now.
I do hope,
That's
since we started it in 2019, that's
Right.
3 years ago, I do hope we can make it a priority at some point soon, because we want it done before Brian and I leave the tree commission.
Yeah, Peggy, that's not going to happen. We're leaving sooner than that. But we have been talking about this, Mike and Peggy and I, and I know with everything going on, but we're all committed to doing what we can to help with the RFP for the tree studies. So to answer some of the questions, I mean, as Mike referred to earlier, there is $100,000 still in there. that's earmarked for an additional 100,000 for the tree study. So one of the things that's top of our list and something that hopefully we can get done, pandemic notwithstanding, is we can move forward on the tree study. I know we've all talked about that. We're eager to do that. I said that at the March meeting. That was 6 months ago, but that's nobody's fault. So we're going to keep pressing along.
Any other budget questions? Okay. The other thing I want to speak to, I was hoping to have it prepared for this meeting. As Paul had mentioned, you know, we try to get some of these graphs prepared based on the removals and tree planting we've done in the city. And I have collected all the tree planting locations except for 6, and I'm hoping to do it Friday morning. So I'm hoping to get this done and to you, you know, sooner in the next couple of weeks. But that's where we are with that project. Are there any questions about that?
So
Mike, there was a few categories that we kind of wanted to add last year or revise. I remember, and I know they're written down somewhere. Do you have those? Do you recall those?
I'd have to look. I personally do not remember adding.
I feel like it was like 2 or 3 categories. It was like plantings by neighborhood, and you know, maybe one other one, but it wasn't I don't know. If there was a way that there could be a slight back and forth in that process, you know, if you get them and then we say, well, can we do one more thing? If we could change this, then we can go back to Brian Ray and sort of update them. Is that possible?
I'm not sure what we would need to do to do it by. We would need another attribute for the location, but I mean, possibly. But we have to look at it. I guess we need to know what you want.
Right. Yeah. And I think I can sort of go back through meeting minutes and try to find out what those were. But anyway, I'll try to look into that. Just curious if there's any back and forth, and when would you want those by if we were going to send them?
If you could give me those in like the next week, if anybody has other things that, and we can send out that report just so new members can see what's in it.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, this is a high priority, especially since it ties into the report to council. Assuming council is really going to be having time to hear from us in November, but we're just going to continue to move forward on this, which means that it's August, the end of August, which means that we really want to pull this all together so that we can present to the commission next month. And we can have a discussion about the metrics. This is in keeping with the spirit of Roxanne. I know she's listening, and all the heavy lifting she did, and we're committed to carrying it forward. So,
yeah, and I would like to just, Mike, if you could coordinate with our Education and Advocacy Committee, because that's one of our priorities. And so I will get with Paul and Roxanne and see if there's anything else we'd like you to include. But if you could just, you know, coordinate with us on what you're doing so we can kind of work together on that.
Okay.
And to be clear, Peggy will get with Paul, and then later she'll get with Roxanne, and then Paul will talk to Roxanne.
Yes, right.
Just to make that clear.
Well, Roxanne's not on the tree commission, so actually the 3 of us can work together.
Well, she's on the committee though, so.
Oh, okay.
Hate to be a stickler.
Okay. Got it.
Okay. This is what we already talked about. The CIP. This is it, just in a different format than we saw up here. It's showing the same thing. What was spent on trees? How much is left over for planting for this year? Okay. There's no more questions about budget. We'll move on to the work plan.
Since you just showed us the budget, do you want to jump into your tree planting proposal? Or either way, it's up to you.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So based on the $7,000 we have for tree planting, I keep getting questions from people. there's sort of an expectation in the community that when we remove a tree, we replant it, and we certainly try to do that. This year, obviously, we will not be able to since we do not have new funding for tree planting. So we're trying to figure out a way that is fair to everyone across the community. I kind of put together this ranking system of based on some themes and some priorities of the commission that seem to be recurring as far as street trees, large shade trees, having the highest priority. And then I sort of just took this ranking system and applied it to a couple examples just so people could see sort of what we're looking at. So I guess, I mean, does this make sense to the commission? Is there a better way to do this?
Well, I'll pipe in. I think it seems to be a pretty good way to do it, Mike.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, my question on this was just low canopy neighborhoods. And that's certainly an emphasis, but we do, as Paul was saying, there are other areas within, and do we want to include the, within, for instance, like South Belmont has very little trees. We want to include the block grant neighborhoods.
Sure, I mean, we can.
Yeah, and the other one, Mike, is in one of the scientific papers I read about canopy. For canopies, the lower the amount of canopy per area, the greater the rewards were for planting new trees. So I almost wonder if you put a sliding scale on, Star Hill and 10th and Page, being that they both are under 20%, those get sort of like 5 points. And then you sort of work your way, through the block grant neighborhoods to give them a different point system. So that you really are prioritizing the lowest canopy neighborhoods first. Is that possible, you think?
Yeah, we can look at that. I think we'll find for replacements. I don't have that many in low canopy neighborhoods just because
I know.
planting opportunities, but we can look at it for sure.
Yeah, just if there's any spot to put a tree, we should definitely put one in that spot.
Yeah. One of the things that I was struck by just kind of breezing through the canopy assessment before the meeting was the fact that the CRHA areas in the city, it's broken out by the 5 property types: city property, CHRA, neighborhood, schools, UVA, and private. And the CHRA potential planting area was the highest out of all 5 categories.
So that's it. Mike, this is a loaded question here, but want me to give a really brief summary for you for the CRHA properties?
Sure, go ahead.
So the CRHA properties are not technically city property. They're owned separately. So in the past, we have worked with some CRHA property basically with West Haven to get CRHA to sign a MOU, a memorandum of understanding with the city that the city could plant trees on their property and they would be CRHA's to manage and take care of. It's a very, very time consuming process to work with CRHA, their board, with FAR, with the residents, because you don't want to go in there showing up as the white middle class person who's putting trees in their property. You want that to come from them. And so it is a very, very, very engaging process. There are some CRHA properties like Mickey Drive that don't have as many residents. I think would be a very successful group to work with, but it just requires people to make the effort to want to do that and show up at the farmers markets and introduce the project and planting. And I suspect if there were budget for tree planting, that Parks and Rec would be willing to do it again if it was very clearly organized. The past, we organized one with West Haven and we worked through about 3 to 4 months of rigorous meetings and work. And then at the last hour, after, knocking on doors of residents, asking if they want to tree in their front yard, major work, the last minute, one member of that community was able to shut down the entire process because they had not answered any emails or phone calls for months, and then finally decided to, who's putting these trees in? And it led to a really a frustration. So I think if we were to do CRHA properties in the future, it would take, I'm happy to help anyone who's interested in doing it. I think it's possible. I just know it does require a lot of additional work to do that. And I think it's admirable work. So good point that there is a lot of available planting area. There's low canopies. Those are really great opportunity areas, but there's a big amount of work going into that from a coordination standpoint.
It's a great summation. So Mike, with this feedback, you'll take the criteria and run the numbers, and I assume you'll come back to us in September with sites?
Sure. I can do that.
And to be clear to the new members of the commission and to remind the entire commission, in a normal year with committees working, there would be the Arbor Committee working with Mike and doing this, but given the situation we're in, I asked Mike to just develop a plan for us that we could look at. And I haven't heard any objections. I don't really even think it needs a vote. I think it's just take it and come back to the commission in September. Give us your, usually, and I think Paul, you can remind me about this too. Usually, and Mike, you usually come back with location, tree type, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I'll have all that.
Okay. I know it's not going to be as many trees as the past, but this is a morale booster for all of us. Given, I mean, it's a blessing we had some money left considering the current budget was whacked. So, so thanks for coming up with this.
Yeah, no problem.
So I know you want to talk about your annual work plan.
Sure.
And we're doing good on time. We got about 6 minutes. One of the things I just want to remind the commission and remind myself that one of the new features of this format is that we invite public comment. So just want to make sure that we stick to the adjournment time, but we also honor that commitment that we have.
All right, I'll try to go through this pretty quickly. So we talked about the Canopy Study. So every 5 years, we try to do an aerial analysis of and look at the tree canopy in Charlottesville and look at lost gain and look at by neighborhoods. So that's in process. The grant has been applied for cost sharing. So that is in process. I'm sorry. I'll go over just a little bit of what I do since we have some new members. So as the urban forester, I maintain about 8,000 trees in our city parks, schools, and right-of-way, and then another about 700 acres of forest and trails as well. So I'm responsible for the maintenance of these trees and things, as well as the downtown mall. So that's the bulk of my work. I also support other city departments, as needed as much as I can. Including public works, and I support NDS in the site plan review process. So as NDS is responsible for the code enforcement and things of that area, I help to support them because if a large shade tree is required and it has a scientific botanical name, they don't know if it's a large shade tree. And sometimes there'll be site issues and things like that, and I'm happy to support them as much as I can. So, but that's kind of my role to NDS. So something else as far as tree maintenance, for one of my studies I'd really like to get done this year is to create a standard operating procedure for tree work prioritization, which is very, would be very important in times of limited budget constraints, but generally we just need something for budgeting purposes. So if you have a lot of my work, obviously hazard trees and risk, it's a lot of tree risk assessment. That sort of work takes precedent. There's other things that people expect done as far as pruning and things of street trees. and just having some sort of a document to help me and to help the public understand that, you know, this is why we're not doing this year. We have to do this, would be tremendously helpful. Creating an outdoor cafe heater use policy. This is to protect the trees from being damaged on the downtown mall and elsewhere from the outdoor propane heaters. But it's going to require support from other departments. To GPS all the trees incorporated into the conservation ordinance, you know, that's just really adding an attribute. Since these trees are protected, we want them, you know, to be indicated spatially. Create a tree ranking system for planting locations. We already talked about that, how we're going to do that. And then something else that's kind of been interesting that came up when I have these conversations with people that say we may or may not be able to put a tree here this year because we have very limited funding. A lot of times people will say, well, can I buy one? Can I put one there? And we do have a funds for the forest where people can make a donation, and then, you know, we select the tree, our contractor installs it when we do our fall planting. But there's not a formal process for that. And since I am getting a lot of these requests, it would be nice, it would be helpful to have, you know, documents saying, here's how we do this, and just so, you know, we're doing it across the board. So it's something that I think would be helpful. And it's always exciting when people are excited to get trees. So.
And Mike, I have a question about that, the tree donation policy. So into the funds of the forest account, would it ever, in the same way that there is an, you know, an MOU written with CRHA in the past that says, you know, we'll plant this for you, but we're not responsible, you know, this is your tree, et cetera, like no liability from Parks and Rec. Would it ever be possible, because, you know, obviously right away is totally limited, if you were to donate money to the Friends of the Forest Fund, and then that could then be utilized by other organizations or other contractors to plant on private property if an MOU with that homeowner was established. So, and maybe there was a criteria that said, how do you plant it within 20 feet of right of way? You know, that you can't putting this in your backyard as your private tree, but you may do one tree per yard, and then the city could have a contractor install that in their yard. No liability for utilities or anything like that. Just, you know, they're just basically, the funds are going in a way that we can get trees into neighborhoods that are sort of low income neighborhoods. And maybe it's just a priority for low income neighborhoods only. I don't know. Is that something that do you think Parks and Rec would ever consider or look at?
I think that would be difficult for the city to do, because you would be, someone is giving money to a city organization, the city is giving it back to the public. I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but I think a nonprofit like the Charlottesville Tree Stewards or a 501c3 would probably be better equipped to handle something like that.
But would it be possible, say, then for that money to go to the tree stewards to implement that policy?
Well, I mean, then you're doing the same thing, right?
Well, I mean, not really. I mean, like the CRHA thing, you know, that's not city property, but the city, you know, that it was an authorization that, you know, that CRHA was responsible for those trees. The funds came from the city and went to CRHA. Could you do a similar thing, you know, to support those, you know, low income neighborhoods? I mean, you don't have to answer it now. I guess it's kind of a question for the, you know, would the city's legal teams think that's a feasible solution? We're just trying to find ways to get Canopy into low income neighborhoods without, you know, doing all the fundraising through CATS and other groups. Like, would the city ever support that? Because Fredericksburg does that, and other cities in Virginia do that. Would Charlottesville ever consider that?
Yeah, I'd have to look into it more.
Yeah, good.
I just have, just a couple of comments, Mike? Thanks for doing this. It looks like good things to do. I echo what Paul says, because getting more trees in the low canopy neighborhoods, you know, most of the area is going to be on the private property. So actually our committee, working with the Arbor Committee, would like to do some investigation of what other communities are doing with that. And I can send you, I'm going to send you the Harrisonburg and what Richmond do for number 6, the tree donation policy. I'll send you what they have. They have an application process. So we did a little research on that, and I'll send it to you.
Okay.
And number 2 on the prioritize tree maintenance. I've had some experience in that. I'd be glad to kind of help you and show you what our firm has done before. But, I think that it would be good to, certainly the trees that we've put under the tree ordinance would be sort of top of the list. And, I think we have about 16 now, and we have about that many or more in the pipeline. So, that's about 30 trees. I would think they would kind of be high on the list because we've identified them as some of the most important trees in Charlottesville.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Thanks, Mike. This is great. As with other items on the agenda tonight, I encourage anybody who might have some follow-up questions. Don't swamp Mike. He's doing a lot, but if you have any issues or questions you want to pose to Mike, I just want to elaborate on one thing since it's come up in 3 sections of the agenda, and that is the Canopy Study. So as Mike said, we did work with Mike, Peggy and I, and Paul had some input too in terms of the criteria. We've expanded the criteria for the Canopy Study. Mike has applied for the grant. But to be clear, especially to new members, that is work that will happen next spring at the earliest, correct, Mike? Late spring, summer. So that's in this fiscal year, but it'll be a while before we actually get to the actual flyover. So at this point, turn to Anson, who is the host and manager. He knows if we have public participants, and if anybody has raised a hand or pressed 9 on their phone to make a comment, this would be the opportunity for any public comment at this time. Can you see anybody there? I can't see anybody on my screen.
No, not yet.
Okay. Well, once this is,
oh, hold on, Roxanne White. Hold on. We've
I knew she was there.
Here. All right. The attendees, hold on. I gotta click the hand thing. Hold on, what's going on? All right. All right.
There she is.
There you are.
She's muted.
Unmute. Sorry, there we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, hi, Roxanne.
Okay. So I just had a comment on the, I thought it was a great question about the CHRA properties because it was very difficult, but one of the things that's important is not only the tree commission needing to do something about planting trees, but just to remind the tree commission that their South First Street and also Garrett Square or Friendship Court are both in big processes of, renovation and redevelopment. And it's a great area that the tree commission should be watching to make sure that with the affordable housing strategies and what they're doing with all the density is that trees are also included in those projects as the city goes through and renovates all those properties, because they're all basically on the list to be done at some point. So that's just something to watch when those projects come in. That's all.
Thanks, Roxanne.
Yeah.
Anson, do you see any other?
No, I'm sitting here watching. But while I'm talking, I will say that we've gotten some great data from the city. They are really helpful getting very accurate aerial photographs. So we're going to be able to do some really interesting GIS work. I'm just kind of telling this to the new members. If any of you are interested in the data science side of things, we've got some good data now and more good data to come. Kind of exciting. The main library at the University of Virginia is going to be willing to work with us on that. So we've got a cool data science team locally involved.
That's exciting. That's good news.
Yeah. Oh, and there's one more plug. The UVA urban lumber team is moving along. We've got a little bit of support there. So that's another small project, but I'm hopeful that we'll get a couple thousand board feet this week. Actually, I think we're milling a couple thousand board feet of poplar. And we're going to be working on some really heritage trees that had to come down, working with facilities though to save the trees to make some usable lumber. So that's something we're kind of excited about at UVA.
So for new members, if you haven't figured it out, Anson is both a data person and a hands-on woodworker and builds kilns. And as I said in my report, made some tree signs. It was for the dog park, I guess. And before all of this happened, he was going to be making us all little signs that we would have in front of our places out of wood. So that's something to look forward to.
If you come by my place on King Street, if you schedule a time to come by, I will make a sign for any of you. You can even, I'll give you some wood you can pick from. We've got some holly that is lovely. I just got a bunch of live edge walnut that doesn't carve very easily, but it's beautiful. And I got about 1,000 board foot of poplar that I'm very excited about. It's got that purple stuff in the middle.
So would we hang a sign up behind us in these meetings? Is that the idea?
Yeah, just send me a note. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So Anson, the poplar wood and boards that you're going to be milling at UVA, are they targeted for a particular project?
They are not yet. We are working on an e-commerce solution for that, so that we can sell them to the architecture students. I think we will be working with your department, hopefully working with Melissa Goldstein, I believe, over in the Goldman, pardon me, over in the architecture school. She's wonderful, of course, and so there should be some material available.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Could I ask a question? Since the UVA, I guess they're harvesting the wood on the UVA property, but just wondering, the city's going to have a heck of a lot of ash trees. And similar to Harrisonburg, you know, they really are making some wonderful things. Could there be any way the city could work with UVA and, you know, try to harvest some of this wood instead of having it all go in a chipper?
Mike? You're bored, right? You don't have anything else to do, right?
I mean, it's something we could look into. I don't know if we're going to get like volume of quality logs as a result of mineral ash core removal, but I mean, we will have wood waste for sure. So it's something we can look into. It depend on a few different things. So.
I have an Anson question or a data related question that I got very interested in watching Paul's presentation of canopy cover per neighborhood. The data would exist to show the sort of average lot size in a neighborhood, like very small lots at 10th and Page. And the city also has data on the impervious surface that would give us an sort of rough indication of how much area is plantable. It might be useful for us to have a sort of second column of those percentages of tree canopy cover that give us a sense of what kind of neighborhood it is. It's maybe a long-term goal, but it's also probably fairly easy to figure out if we knew where those percentages came from to begin with.
I can help with that. I mean, iTree Tools is kind of the de facto standard for most projects. It's an open source tool set. It's fairly reproducible. I've done a Canopy study myself just to see how our numbers were looking. It takes about a couple of hours to go through and sample 1,000 points, which is what they start out with for any given data set. iTree Tools is great. If anybody wants to meet one-on-one, I can walk you through the process of looking at a neighborhood or looking at a region, and it'll give you some numbers about sequestration. It's not great. I don't trust all of their numbers. I think some of them are need to be more transparent. Some of the equations could be done in a more effective modern way, but it's a good starting point.
Well, and with the upcoming urban canopy assessment that's coming up, I mean, we can ask them to run as many different comparisons and models as we want. Typically, I mean, we kind of meet with them and say, well, we'd love to have a chart that says possible planting percentage in Belmont on streets within 10 feet of the right of way. Like, we can make criteria that are pretty unique for them. And I know, Anson, you can actually probably figure those out in GIS as well, but I know that we'll have a consultant at our disposal to sort of work through those issues when we get into that next spring.
I'll tell you, I love jumping in on that because I think that we, I work in the UVA library system, and we do a really good job of making that data, how the sausage gets made, transparent, sometimes better than consultants who have a vested interest in making money and getting rehired again the next time that you want somebody to press a button. So anybody, just putting that out there.
Paul,
I'm going to consider.
I was just going to say, one of the charts you showed today showed a rough estimate of how much percentage of the area of different neighborhoods have areas to plant. I mean, it's rough. It doesn't tell you exactly where, but it gives you approximately how much area.
We have specific data down to the lots, from the original Canopy assessment in 2014. So I think what Mark's asking for, we kind of already have, but we can get it again and again, and we can wait until Anson's, when it wants to pick it up.
So we have 3 minutes left. I'm going to consider this items announcements not on the agenda. Action items for next meeting. Peggy has taken notes. Mike has taken notes. So the three of us will get together on that. I just want to reiterate to our new members, as I did in my emails, that we are, all of us, eager to talk about trees and eager to welcome you. So feel free to reach out to any of us at any time to talk about trees, to help you walk through any of the documents, whatever it is. I hope even at this distance, you have a sense that we're a friendly bunch. We're collegial. We have a mission, and we really enjoy the work that we do. I want to thank you all for your patience over the last 5-6 months to get us to this point. I know that I'm really eager to re-engage with all of you. I think this went actually rather well for our first foray into this virtual environment. I want to thank Mike for his efforts behind the scene and for all the slack that he's been picking up, and look forward to moving forward. And to our communications friends, Joe and Brian and everybody who makes this possible. Without you and without the General Assembly passing a law making this legal, we would really be dead in the water. We would have no ability to do our business. So we appreciate it very much. Last comment from anybody else? Otherwise, it's approaching 7 o'clock. All right, then I say the first virtual electronic meeting of the Tree Commission is adjourned. Thank you all. I think Anson, you can.
Thanks, everyone.
I think Anson will shut the whole thing down.
See y'all later.
Thanks, guys.
Next month.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Nice seeing everybody.
Good meeting.
See y'all.
Good to see you all.